Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to be with our guest today. He's a genuinely wonderful person who has dedicated his life to a pursuit that, especially when he started, was almost insultingly overlooked. As you'll hear him speak, you will hear a degree of clarity around the water issue that is rare to find. If you have not read their book, The Worth of Water, which I will go and grab in just a second. I can see it, but it's not on my desk. The book that Gary wrote with Matt Damon is the best articulation of why we should all care about this issue. And so we wanted to get Gary on to speak to the Burnt Island Ventures network, because it's really important that you know and understand exactly what water.org and WaterEquity are doing, just a little bit about their work. From a standing start, Gary's work at water.org and now WaterEquity has supplied over 58 million people with access to safe water or sanitation through affordable financing. And they are, as you will hear, only speeding up. It's tremendously exciting, all of the work that they've done. He's got 30 years of experience in water, in solving the global water and sanitation crisis. And we really do believe, as we said at the title of this session, that he is more than a contender. I think he's certainly at the top of the certainly up the top of the list for the most successful water entrepreneur in history. He just happens to run a nonprofit. So, Gary, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It really is very kind of you. We're going to go to the Genesis story in just a second, but I want to start with the investment side of things. Obviously, that's where our worlds cross over. For us as an early stage technology fund, and then you increasingly, running the numbers up, which we will also get to through the medium of investment. But water.org says that water is the best investment the world can make. Why is that?
Well, Tom, thanks for having me here today. It's always great to be in a discussion with you, because obviously you're a great interviewer, and I appreciate the energy you always bring to this, and the support of water.org and WaterEquity in so many ways, and greatly appreciate that. And thanks to everybody for joining today to learn more about the water crisis, the global water and sanitation crisis, and more importantly, solutions. So glad to be a part of this group today. Why is water the most important or the most valuable investment we can make? I think I could answer that in a few different ways. I think first of all, what did we do with water 100 years ago, right? We've somehow figured out that investing in water and sanitation was the only thing that was going to allow economies to develop. And those countries and those economies around the world who figured that out and put safe water and sanitation at the forefront and invested, lots of money to make that happen. They had the foresight to see why it was a good investment. And, frankly, in the US and Europe and other places, we need to kind of rediscover why that was so important, because we're failing to invest in that infrastructure now. And we're going to see why it is important to do that and why that's a great investment when some of our infrastructure starts to fail, either due to age. Some of that infrastructure that we put in 100 years ago is still there and it needs to be replaced, and with climate and how that's going to disrupt infrastructure. But from our perspective, when we look at this through the lens of some of the world's poorest people, which is really the target of water.org and WaterEquity, and that's what distinguishes us as an asset manager, is that we bring a lens of social impact in terms of how water and sanitation investments can help disproportionately people living in poverty. That's what sets us apart than any other kind of water asset manager, I believe. And why is it a good investment for them? Because it underpins everything. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals and start to take those apart for education, for health, for women's empowerment, for a number of things, those goals can't be met until you meet the water and sanitation goals. And that's why, it's investing in water is investing in girls' education, because they're no longer walking miles every day, to collect water. I mean, women and girls will spend 200 million hours today walking to get water. So you buy back people's time so they can do more productive things. You put girls back in school. You increase health impacts. You reduce the cost and burden of having to pay for hospital visits and the transportation cost to even get to a health center when you're in some of these rural areas. So it is basically the linchpin that allows economic development to happen. We've seen that kind of in the West or the global North, and there's no reason to believe why it isn't like the best investment in the global South.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's so well articulated. So you got to that space and realization, and I think you realize it better than probably anyone else on the planet. How did you start? Like, where did this all come from? And walk us through kind of the sort of probably I'm definitely a truncated version of the early days, but like we would just want to get an idea of the genesis.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I'll try to truncate it. And the genesis is, I went to school to become an engineer, and I thought this was largely an engineering problem. And it is, technology and engineering to a certain extent. And so my path that I went down was to start an NGO that was about, basically drilling wells and taking philanthropy and applying it in a way that we could drill more wells. Yeah. But then you pretty quickly, as a numbers guy, you kind of do the math and see how many people need water and sanitation. And you see the magnitude of that problem, 1.7 billion people without sanitation, 771 million without water. And you juxtapose the scale of the problem with the scale of your solution, which meant that you were never going to have enough philanthropy, enough charity in the world ever to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Fortunately, being in communities and understanding how people, particularly poor women around the world, experience water poverty through that initial work, it became pretty clear that there was a whole different way to look at this problem. And what we started to see emerging was this wasn't so much a charity problem to be solved as it was a market to be served. And that was a key insight for us, because what I saw was, to kind of ground it in reality, everyone in the world waking up today got water somewhere. Yep. Right? Even though they're not getting safe water, the 771 million, they're getting water somewhere. The question is, how much time are they spending to get that water? How many miles are they walking? How many hours, the 200 million hours a day? Or how much were they paying in terms of cash? A lot of people in urban settings in low-income countries are forced to buy water from water vendors because they don't have a water hole or a well to walk to. So they end up paying about 15x for a liter of water relative to their middle-class neighbors who are connected to the grid, right? Buying water informally from these tanker trucks that isn't even of good quality. So how much time were people spending? How much money were they spending? How much they were spending in terms of healthcare costs because of this? These all are what we call coping costs, right? Yeah. When you don't have access to a reliable water connection and sewage connection, you bear incredible coping costs. And so you can afford to pay that water vendor, $2 today to get water, but you can't afford the $300-400 it might take to pay to get connected to the grid, or pay to get connected to a rainwater harvesting system that you put in place. And so that was the insight, that you add up these coping costs, they're more than $300 billion a year. Yeah. Right. Which ironically is about what it would cost to solve this crisis. If you could redirect all of that capital in a new way, then the problem can contain its own solution. And that was the insight. And so it was our job to figure out, how do we build the evidence base to help people, investors, philanthropists to believe that we could kind of turn this charity problem upside down and attack it through the capital markets. And that's what we did through water credit and spurring microloans through microfinance institutions to then start lending, not just for income generating things like a cow to get milk to sell to get a revenue stream, or a sewing machine where you get, but like look at it as like an income enhancing loan, which is what we did. And now, through about 160 financial partners around the world, we've been able to help 58 million people get access to water, not through traditional philanthropy, but through a small loan, which is equivalent. The number of loans that are out there have churned is about $4.5 billion in capital from these financial institution partners that we have.
It's so spectacular. I mean, I think especially in sort of philanthropic circles, everybody always throws around the word leverage, around there it is. That's what they were talking about, and it's much rarer than it should be. So before we get on to kind of WaterEquity, would you mind just spending a couple of moments sort of elucidating where water.org plays and where now WaterEquity plays and kind of the relationship between the two? I love it that you're the CEO and co-founder of both organizations. Like, why have one incredibly important job when you can have two? Let's do this.
No, it is clearly a story of the two working together, and we're seeing that now more than ever. And what we know is that this investment capital is not flowing right now, and there's reasons for that. There are broken markets. There is lack of kind of investment preparation, deal pipeline development, and when you talk to the development finance institutions, when you talk to other investors, the concept, the lament that always comes back is there's no bankable deals out there. We have capital to invest, even in low-income countries, but there are no bankable deals. There is no project pipeline. And so what we see is the ability to use philanthropic capital through water.org in order to build that investment pipeline. And we've done that through microfinance institutions, where we now see WaterEquity's investment funds, 4 funds to date, now having positions in debt to those financial institutions around the world, so they can do millions more of these loans. And so we've been able to use technical assistance in a way that gets them to be bankable for those loan portfolios. We're able to use philanthropic capital to help them do market research around that so that the capital can flow. And now we see that same potential with infrastructure. We know that particularly with infrastructure, there aren't deals out there, and you do need to kind of have this kind of blended approach where you can bring in some capital philanthropically to get the deals to the point where they will pass the investment committees of WaterEquity's funds and potentially other investors as well. And I saw this, come home really in a big way when I was in London recently for this human resilience investing forum that the World Economic Forum held. And I was, it wasn't surprising to see how all these investors and DFIs were looking at this and saying, look, what we need to do is to continue to build out this technical assistance kind of sidecar where you do use subsidies from government and other places so that you can build the deal pipeline so that the investors can come. The problem was they were completely disconnected. You don't have that kind of under one roof where you have this project development function, this technical assistance function coordinated with the investors. So it can take years in order to put deals together where the one person or the one entity is providing that TA and the other is the capital. With water.org and WaterEquity, we've put it under one roof, right? So we know when we go out and provide that technical assistance to build that investment pipeline, it's done in a very bespoke way. It's done with the water.org team recognizing what it's going to take to pass the investment committee of the various WaterEquity funds. And so we can go out and do this in a much shorter timeline by combining that deal preparation, that project development with the investment arm of WaterEquity. And that really is showing up as our key, I think, comparative advantage.
Sounds an awful lot like vertical integration.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it's all of my business school is coming flooding back to me. No, this is great. I think one of the it's so wonderful hearing you speak, and because I really do mean it about kind of the entrepreneur. I know that very rarely people kind of talk to you. I think maybe it happens all the time, but I think very rarely people talk to you in kind of those terms. One of the things I want to kind of click into is that it really struck me in the book that when you were talking to your partner microfinance providers at water.org, and you were thinking, okay, it feels like we're kind of getting to a sort of a crunch here. It's looking like there's kind of a plateau happening. How do we figure this out? And then you just did what every great entrepreneur should do. You just went and asked them. And I was so struck by this idea that what do you need? Capital. okay, well, if you got your capital, when could you start like doing all the stuff that you want to do? And they said kind of tomorrow. Like, how important is this idea of staying in the information flows between Water.org and WaterEquity's clients, whether it's the project or the microfinance providers? Like, how do you maintain that like sense of connection to make sure that you are really providing the product that your customer needs? Because it's really palpable in the book, like that sense of process.
Hmm. No, that's a good insight, because it is, you got to know your market that you're operating in. And I think that's the thing. A lot of people, I mean, there's probably 1,000 water NGOs out there that are still seeing this problem as a charity problem, and having that insight from the ground up and spending time in these communities and walking, with women to get water, you recognize what the market is and how it's different than what the conventional wisdom shows.
Yes.
We do that because what we have is our teams around the world that are made up of local nationals. We don't send a bunch of engineers or finance people around the world to go do this. We find and cultivate the local talent that has their ear to the ground there and can figure out, like, when we ask that question, what, the problem's bigger than what we're doing, what can we do next to match the magnitude of the problem? And our local partners told us, Matt and I, as you referenced, tell the story in the book. We're in India asking all these financial partners, what do you need in order to do millions more of these loans? And they told us that, reliable access to affordable capital. And that was really the aha from the ground up, to say, okay, we need to go raise a different type of capital to sit aside alongside our philanthropy. And that is creating the first fund for what would become, WaterEquity. Doing that with friends and family. Matt put in the first $1 million. We hatched this idea in the back of a Jeep in India. And he's like, okay, I'll put in the first $1 million. We'll go find some of our existing donors who are kind of friends and family and get them to not only donate, but to invest. And, Matt kicked that off, and that's what led to the start of WaterEquity, which, was a pretty important entrepreneurial play for us. You're a water NGO and you're going to tell the world now you're going to start an asset manager and start raising debt and equity in a way that's going to provide a financial return. Also say the business we're in is suspension of disbelief. So we frequently have to get people to suspend disbelief in order to kind of move forward with some of our innovations.
It's such an interesting idea, isn't it? Because, in the context of our investments, I mean, we've got the BIV team here, but they hear me endlessly prattling on about focus and if you're doing two things at the same time. But at the same time, I really do believe you are only one hire away from somebody who is going to be focused on building this next stage and an element of the business. I always do this when I hear you talk. My mind goes into fireworks. We've got a lot to cover. The next thing I want to talk about, what does the phrase "run up the numbers" mean to you?
Okay, that's actually a quote from President Clinton when we started talking about this. That's where Matt and I got introduced, actually, was at the Clinton Global Initiative. And that was where, President Clinton understood what we were doing with water credit and the potential with this. But at that point, we hadn't even reached 1 million people as an organization at that point. And, you fast forward today and, we're reaching, and that was, in the first 20 years or so of water.org, 1 million people, right? And then you fast forward to today and we're reaching 1 million people every 6 weeks with access to small loans. And so, President Clinton saw this back, in 2009 or so, 2010, when Matt and I first were joining forces. And he understood, running the Clinton Global Initiative, that people respond to success and people respond to numbers. And so that's when he said, just keep running. I can't do the Clinton initiative, the Clinton impression like Matt can. Matt does a great one, but just keep running up those numbers, keep running the numbers up. And that's what it's taken. Because what that does is gives you an evidence base, right? The fact that we were able to run up those numbers from 2009 up to 2015, when we launched WaterEquity, investors had much more reason to believe, because we had already reached tens of millions of people and shown that there is a bankable product, and that is, poor people value water. They value it so much, they're willing to spend a lot of money on that, and they're willing to take out a loan to get a solution that they see as best for them. That is what allowed us to run up the numbers.
So it's kind of an interesting juncture to bring in this idea of, I forget exactly the nomenclature in the book, but there's the philanthropy brain and the finance brain, and the two don't mix very well. But I thought it was absolutely fascinating, your description of your like realization that actually what you have here is a tremendous willingness to pay, a relatively low ability to pay, but there is absolutely no problem in meeting people kind of where they are at. But it was your job essentially to like convince the world who either want to do philanthropy or they want to do for profit, and why the hell would you be mixing the two? Can you talk a little bit about that kind of evolution and how difficult it was to kind of unpick that at the kind of the advent of the idea of impact investment?
Yeah, it was incredibly difficult at the time, back in 2014, because the concept of social impact investing hadn't taken that much root, particularly in the context of low-income countries. And so that dichotomy, like, okay, here's how I make my money. Here's my family foundation, here's my donor advised fund, and it invests in blue chip stocks or whatever, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then over here is where I give my money away. And we had to kind of break down that barrier. And it's still, we're not completely there yet, but people certainly are seeing that as a high potential mixing of their assets that they want to if, for instance, people who have donor advised funds, the money is sitting there. It's already been given away. They've already gotten their charitable contribution on their tax bill for that.
Yes.
And so regardless of what cause they want to give that money away to, whether it be higher education, the arts, or poverty in their own cities, that money is going to sit there for a while. In fact, they only have to give out 5% of it a year to meet the IRS guideline, right?
Yes, they
so
do.
why not invest that corpus in something that's already going to provide great social impact, like one of the WaterEquity funds, and while they're waiting to give their money away. Matt said it just last week. He kind of said, like, well, you can give your money away twice. You can give it you can invest it to get all this social impact while you're waiting to give it away, and then you can give it away to whatever cause later on. And so that message, I think, is starting to take root, especially with WaterEquity, demonstrating that we can provide competitive financial returns on investment. Then it becomes a story that we just need to figure out how to tell better. And frankly, a lot of our corporate investors, the fund that we closed earlier this year, we have investors like Starbucks in there, we have DuPont, we have Reckitt, we have Gap, and they are the ones actually that are using their balance sheets in that fund to be able to deliver social impact, but also deliver financial returns back to their companies.
Yeah, absolutely. My partner Christine has a question, and we're going to do more questions at the end, but if you do have any for Gary, please do drop them in the chat. Christine's question is about program experiments that you've run, whether it's through water.org or WaterEquity, and made a pivot or update based on the result. Perfectly timed, because my next question was going to be just to prove to you that I really did do the reading, Gary. So Matt said about you, which I thought was a really interesting perceptive thing, especially in somebody that doesn't come from sort of an entity building or company building or whatever you want to call it background. So he said, what really impressed me the most was his comfort level with failure, his willingness to accept it as an inevitable and indispensable part of the process, which is a really, I think, a highly complimentary and I think very profound thing to say about someone else. And I think really interesting that it's something that he really noticed. How do you think about failure and experimentation in the context of your work? And how do you make sure that you keep that spirit alive as your organization grows?
Yeah, certainly, spanning over 30 years, you're going to run into some dead ends at different points. And otherwise, if you're not, if you don't, you're probably not being bold enough. And I think it's a balance, right? You don't want to be reckless with what you're doing, but you also realize, if you hold yourself accountable to solving the problem that you said you're going to solve, and again, your solution doesn't match the magnitude of that problem, then you have to take some risk, and I think, and fail. And, in the early days of trying to prove that you could bring debt into this, we worked with some NGOs. We first tried to turn water NGOs into microfinance institutions, basically. And a couple of those initiatives where, we basically said, our NGO partners that we were supporting with philanthropy, look, we can keep doing what we're doing, where we're just making you grants and you're drilling wells, but that's not, we have this other pot of money over here that we want to experiment with, and we'll give you a loan if you want to try to figure out how to work with community-based organizations to deliver water that they can then repay. And as it turns out, it's not a great idea to try to turn a water NGO, in Kenya into a microfinance institution cut of the same cloth of a really successful one in India, right?
Yeah.
And so, we took a pretty big hit. I think we had to write off more than 50% of those initial projects. And then we pivoted to like, okay, it's not going to be through NGOs. We're going to work through microfinance institutions that in turn can partner with some expertise, with some local NGOs as needed to be able to make those water products that are being lent for viable and sustainable. And so that was a big aha for us when we made that pivot. And it wasn't, fortunately we had risk capital, right, which not a lot of NGOs have. We developed an R&D fund, which we're able to get enough donors to say, okay, here's some unrestricted money to go out and to experiment. And that's why we were able to kind of pioneer water credit.
Yep.
That's why we had the philanthropic capital at water.org to spin off WaterEquity, because we had this new ventures fund money that we had that was unrestricted. And so, it took us about $11 million to stand up WaterEquity, a philanthropic capital, to get that off the ground. And that allowed us to go out and hire the right expertise in finance and in asset management, so that we had that team ready before really we were making a pitch to invest in us as an asset manager. So that's a really good example of another pivot, right? We're pivoting from just being a philanthropy-led organization to creating this asset manager, but using philanthropy to catalyze the launch of the asset manager so that it becomes viable on day one and builds a stronger pitch for investors that we already have the team there and the deal pipeline through water.org.
Yeah, really interesting. My actually next question was going to be about the team. I had the pleasure of doing sort of this, but on stage at SOCAT with Jennifer Schorsch, who was the president of water.org for a long time. And when you got to that point where it felt like, okay, we got to build the team, it looks like that, it was, let's find the person. And Jennifer had an amazing operating experience at Starbucks and, and all the rest of it. And that was the beginning of kind of building the team. You are now, it's an extraordinarily size of the undertaking. One of the most striking things about particularly WaterEquity is the pace of it, right? Is that you've just closed 150 million, you're going out to another one, and it looks like you're just going to aim to run it up. This all needs people, especially if you're going to be building these projects relatively bespoke, etc. So how did you and how do you now think about building the team to deliver on the sort of frankly endless promise of what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, well, fortunately, we get tons of applications for every job posting that we have.
I can only imagine your poor team organization must be wading through them.
Yeah, so certainly, there's a lot of people who are aware of what we're doing, especially kind of inside water and inside finance, that understand this. And I think we have become kind of an employer of choice for a lot of people who want to do this work. And so, yes, I mean, we have to always be investing in the team. And as I said, having the ability to build out the team, and by extension, the deal flow and the pipeline that's needed, so that when we close a fund, we can quickly deploy it and not just have it, sitting in the bank. And so We, as I said, we look for that talent on the ground around the world. We look for it in terms of the management of water.org and WaterEquity in terms of the headquarters. And the key to it is, we have to pay competitively, right? We can't just necessarily lock in on kind of nonprofit compensation if we want to attract the right talent. Now, we still can't pay as much as BlackRock, probably, to do this, but we can find this intersection of people's passion, right, where they're willing to take, a little bit of a discount because of the social impact that we're doing. So that little bit of a discount they're willing to provide for their labor, as well as us wanting to stretch a little bit in terms of compensation, allows us to build the right team that is motivated by the financial incentive to work here, but also by the social impact. Now you mix that kind of talent pool that's out there that's willing to kind of bridge with the ability to have the resources to hit the ground running. So for instance, Amazon provided us a $10 million grant to our water and climate philanthropic fund. So they came in philanthropically so that we can go out and put this team in place so that when, this fund that you're talking about, this $150 million fund that we closed earlier this year, again, the team is in place, the deal flow is in place, so we can go make it happen. So again, it's this blending of philanthropic capital that allows us to kind of, build for the future, mixed with the investment pipeline in the present.
That's really fascinating. So in terms of just staying on the team thing for a second, but segueing seamlessly into the idea of communication, you saying about one of your key team members, Matt Damon, the guy is simply one of the best communicators I have ever seen. Again, super perceptive, and I think it was really interesting how early you obviously realized the role of communication in the work. And it's definitely, as you said in the answer to my question just the other night, we're getting better at this in water. But could you talk a little bit about the role communication plays in your work and how you see the dynamics of working of, are we getting better? Is it starting to get more traction? What do you think we can do better? Just that idea of communication and maybe Matt's role in that for you.
Yeah, no, communication is so critical. And because of where the world is going to, right? The world on climate, the need to be able to tell a story in a way that intersects and resonates with climate capital, climate philanthropy, and climate investing is critical right now. And I think we as a water sector are getting better at that. I think we are getting better at communication because we have, we had no MDG, right? We all remember the Millennium Development Goals that expired some time ago. There was no water target. There was no water goal. Now with the SDGs, SDG number 6 is a water and sanitation goal. So I think as a sector, we are making progress. I think in terms of climate, climate resilience is definitely resonating with people, investors, as well as, bilaterals, multilaterals, and governments. They recognize that the climate crisis is a water crisis. They recognize that climate refugees are actually water refugees because this is the crux of climate. And so these messages are beginning to resonate for us as a sector. Now, us as an organization or organizations, Water.org and WaterEquity, yes, Matt is like the most effective communicator. I mean, he's a storyteller at heart, right? So it's great when he and I can share the stage together because, I kind of get into the nuts and bolts and wonk out, and Matt's like, okay, let me tell you what Gary's trying to say. And he can just bring it home in a way that I never could. And I think people who read the book can see that as well, as we alternate chapters where, it's in my voice for a while and then in his voice. And Matt can just kind of cut through this, not just because of his celebrity, but because of his storytelling ability, but also he's literally one of the world's water experts now in his own right. I mean, he's been doing this with me, since 2008. And the guy obviously is a quick study. He's very smart, in addition to being a great actor and a great communicator. And so it all comes together when you can have, an organization that has, innovation in its DNA and the evidence base, and then the ability to communicate it. And I think that's happening.
So, should be better prepared, Tom. There it is.
Good.
So it's funny you say that he's a quick study. It's almost like he went to Harvard. Yeah. It's almost like he went to Harvard. No, and he really is a spectacular communicator. And I really like that you said that, is that often I think it's easy to have the perception that this is, someone who's a super useful like face. But again, reading this, he really understands this in a super profound way. So the worth of water. So why this? Why now?
Well, Matt and I have tried a lot of different ways to kind of get the message across about this crisis, the severity of it, how it impacts women and girls, why, water is the best investment the world can make. So, tried a lot of different ways to do that. And it just seemed like maybe there was a story to be told kind of in a longer form. Obviously, we do a lot of op-eds and we, do a lot of interviews, but kind of this long form approach to really laying out the problem, but also the solutions. And so for us, it was a way to tell the innovation story. But if you read it, very closely, you'll see it's really just us being a channel for the people that we strive to serve, and trying to bring their voice to the fore, showing them as the real, source of the solution, as opposed to us, coming in from the outside. And I think that's what we're trying to capture in the book, is that this is a very, bankable thing to invest in philanthropically, because of the leverage that you mentioned, that it's a very bankable thing to invest in from a strict financial return. But it's only because of the source of the solution is the people themselves. And that's what we're trying to really get across in the book. We kind of can come in and add a few insights, nudge the market around a little bit, but it's really not us at the end of the day that provides the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually when I wrote my questions down, I hadn't quite finished it. And then you promptly in the next 3 pages actually answered the question that I had, which is, like, you have a really interesting idea that capital, and especially, well, obviously capital that has a return to it, can be self-determining. That there is a kind of a corpus of capital that, especially if you've got 97% repayment rates, is that
98% repayment rate of the household loans to our partners. Yes.
98% return. So only a 2% loss rate, which any lender would bite your hand off for. What you have is an engine that can be, if you get a corpus of capital big enough, that you can essentially just like steamroll the problem. It may take longer, it may take shorter, but there is an element of self-perpetuation here. Can you talk to us about the kind of the 3 stages between where we are now and kind of the end of this problem within our lifetime?
Yeah, that's a challenging question. Nobody's ever quite put it to me that way, but I'll do my best. Yes, at the end of the day, this is a crisis of capital, right? And it's the cost of the capital, $1.7 trillion. The only way that's going to be reached is through the capital markets, through the private sector, right? Certainly governments and multilaterals have a role to play in this, and they're largely, responsible for getting the infrastructure in place, but we've got to have $1.7 trillion in capital to come in. And what we need to do is to bring in the private capital markets to buttress that. So working backwards from that, if we could get to that stage, there's no reason why you can't invest the capital in the same way that we did in the US or European countries did to put the infrastructure in the ground to then start earning a return in so many ways. There's no reason why. If you have the capital, you can affect that. We've known how to make water safe for over 100 years. We've known how to pump it and distribute it. Yes, there are some gee whiz technologies around desalination and other things that might do things, but basically water treatment happened the same way for 100 years, So working backwards from that, it's like, how do we get the capital markets to respond? Because I said, it's not seen as bankable right now to invest in utilities or in companies that are providing these services in low and middle income countries. And so how do we get the market in? How do we get them to suspend disbelief? Well, you do it by doing it. And now I think working backwards, that's what we're doing with Water.org and WaterEquity together. We're saying there's a new way to put philanthropy together with the capital markets that will allow the capital markets to stand, these funds to stand on their own 2 feet. And that's only because we were able to go out at the household level with our microfinance partners around the world to prove that poor people will take out these loans if they control the solution. And they'll take out these loans and they'll repay them. And so we're in this, if we take it in steps, right? We did the first step. We went out and said, okay, there's $4.5 billion in these loans that have churned. They're repaid at a 98% rate. There is a solid kind of, investment that you can make, right? There's an underlying asset there that is investable. And then we take it and say, okay, we're going to create an asset manager to capitalize on that. And it's going to take this really special blend of expertise and, using some philanthropic capital to kind of jumpstart that. And that's the second level. So now, we have about $350 million of committed capital in WaterEquity funds that are actually doing this right now and providing, our targeted competitive returns. Have to be a little bit careful about accredited investor audiences or not, but that's the thing. And we're ready to then take that to the next level. And so I invite anybody who's here and wants to learn more, go to WaterEquity, and you can, as accredited investors, you can download the materials there for future funds. So that is the next step, right? So then what does that do? That creates a signal effect for the capital markets, is our hope, right? So that others, so it won't just be WaterEquity, managing $1.7 trillion, right? It's going to be us showing that there is a way to navigate this so that investment can stand on its own 2 feet. It can provide ESG for those who are interested in that. A lot of our corporate investors are obviously very interested in the ESG value that comes out of this. It can provide a competitive financial return while all the while attacking one of the world's greatest challenges. It's getting worse because of climate change, and that is sustainable, resilient water and sanitation infrastructure.
Yes. Exactly.
That's how I think the 3 levels can connect once you get people to see that it's bankable.
So the really, really helpful. And by the way, it's very funny. Hi Pat, always nice to see you. We won't go in fully, but yes, it literally is the end users repaying the microfinance institutions. It's stunning because, like, even if you just look at it from the numbers, it's that's a really good business, especially with the what's the target outcome. So a little bit of a disadvantage here. I think, like some of the rooms that you speak to kind of speak water. Not that many of them, I don't know, but this one does. And there have been a couple of questions that people are asking about, like, specific projects that WaterEquity. We talked about that vertical integration, being able to kind of build around the bankable projects. Could you just give us kind of a night of probably whatever the most exciting example that you're looking at with the team at the moment, and what the kind of practical impacts in terms of access to actual built infrastructure is going to be once it's done?
Sure. So when we look at our infrastructure strategy across Water.org and WaterEquity, we see this as a separate pillar standing alongside of our work with financial institutions. And again, we've been able to hire the team that's out there actually putting the pipeline together now for our infrastructure strategy. And that will be looking at how can we invest in project finance, as well as how can we invest in growth companies. On the project finance side, what we recognize is it's a little bit more difficult to work with a public-private partnership, with local governments, with other companies, to be able to build a bankable deal relative to working with an MFI to make them bankable. Like the MFI technical assistance, we've got that nailed, and it doesn't take much time. It's a pretty short cycle. With projects, that are in the tens of millions of dollars or more, it takes really a dedicated project development function, which is what we're building into water.org now. So that we can go out there and do the project preparation. We can see how we fit in with other investors and put the deals together. And that's going to be key for the side of our strategy that's focused on really larger scale projects in water and wastewater. And then as we look at, investing in growth companies alongside of that, and there are a lot of them out there now that are emerging that provide these services in terms of sewage treatment, sludge management, in terms of water treatment, water distribution. And there's a good nexus or good intersection between a lot of governments that are looking at providing concessions for private companies to run some of these. Now, we don't see this, we don't endorse privatization of water resources, but we do see the value of being able to provide, time-bound and kind of rate-bound concessions to private operators to come in and do this. Those private operators, those private companies need investment capital as well. So we can see investing directly in infrastructure deals, but also investing in kind of the ecosystem of private sector actors who have the potential to grow very rapidly and take positions in them as well. So it's a two kind of pronged strategy within the infrastructure strategy.
I knew our worlds would collide practically at some stage.
Okay.
We're at the much earlier stage in terms of like trying to finance the running of experiments that can grow into, reducing the cost, time, complexity of all the stuff that you're trying to do. I will keep working, and then hopefully then our worlds really will intersect. So I just want to go to unless there are any other questions that I've missed, but I think we've kind of got to a sort of a synthesis of what's already been asked. If there are any other questions, do drop them in. So I just want to revisit your mission as we come to the end of this. The Water.org's mission is to solve the global water crisis in our lifetime. And my question about that, what is the principal impediment, other than capital, to stopping that happening? Or is it just capital and we need to run up them numbers? Sorry, up them numbers.
Yeah, you do a better Bill Clinton than me. I think, we've actually kind of hit that, right? When we talk about these three stages and some of the other things, it is about having kind of a solid evidence base for the market, for the underlying asset. It is about then wrapping the communication around that. So I would say, yes, the impediments are, one, continuing to grow the evidence base so that it's more diverse. Right now it's mostly around the people we've reached through small microloans. We got to continue to build the evidence base around infrastructure and climate resilient infrastructure investing. And then we have to be able to communicate it, right? Because, the climate world hasn't been fixed too much on resilience and adaptation. And what we need to do is show that we can provide that through investment, and we're getting there. But then I think, combining evidence base with the new infrastructure strategy with communication, then I think those are some of the impediments we still have to get past. And I just want to shine light on one other aspect of why this makes sense from a climate perspective. And I think this is going to be a key impediment until we can solve for that. And that is illustrating the power of mitigation in the water and sanitation sector and the mitigation that we can provide. When you look at unaccounted for water in low and middle income countries, 30 to 50% of the water is lost, due to leakage in the pipes or due to non-performing performance in terms of billing and collections. And that's a big part of what we see doing with our infrastructure fund, working with some technology partners like Microsoft to help identify, leak detection technologies and get those implemented. And so you look on that side, there's huge potential for impact around mitigation. If we can, do it, because all that water that leaks into the ground, the billions and billions of liters every year, that's carbon.
It's all embodied carbon.
when you look at how big an energy footprint the water sector has, that's completely carbon leaking into the ground. And then that's not even to mention on the sewage side, the fact that 80% of sewage, in low and middle income countries goes completely untreated.
Yeah.
This is like a huge source of greenhouse gases. If you look at the nitrous oxide, which a ton of nitrous oxide is 300 times more potent than a ton of CO2. You look at methane, 27 times more potent than CO2. And you see that, the water sector accounting for, the ranges from 3 to 7% of greenhouse gases. You see that the water and sanitation sector emits more carbon than all the cars in the US combined each year, right? There's a lot of room here for us to get to that next level of investment by trying to, and we need to be more rigorous about that. I'm throwing numbers around. We need more research and data around exactly how we can mitigate before we can kind of sell that to the climate investors. But that's one thing that we plan to be doing over the next year, is getting more serious with the data that can tell that story.
We should talk about that, because I plan to do the same thing. It's really interesting. Like you've obviously brought up the emissions factors of both methane and nitrous oxide. This is not to be underestimated.
Yeah.
The estimates at the moment, I mean, as far as I can tell, are probably, I mean, at least well, there's one nitrous oxide emissions company actually based here in Brooklyn. Their estimate in the US that it's underestimated by at least half. And when you multiply that by what's going on in the globe, there's a very big kind of mountain to climb. Okay, Gary, we've got 5 minutes. I'll do the close, but we've got some really cool people here who are in and around all sorts of interesting circles and resources and companies and all the rest of it. How can we help?
Well, I think continuing to help communicate this, right? So I think we're, all interested in water and sanitation in this room here today. And I think everybody here is a part of the communication team as well, to kind of get the word out about what's happening in the sector and what we can do. So I think that's one thing. Obviously, you can email me, gwhite@water.org. Just email me. And if you're interested in learning more about how you can use philanthropy catalytically, if you're interested, in a family office with the donor advised fund wanting to invest, and WaterEquity interest, if you want to look at our strategy in more depth and investing opportunities, we can provide you with access to all those materials.
Wonderful. Fantastic. I really do encourage everybody here to get in touch. We can direct you to the right people. Natasha, who is here from the WaterEquity team, can also do that. We're going to drop Natasha's email in the chat as well. Advocate with your companies. Remember, Gary, at Christmas, run a 5K, get it sponsored, and do it for water.org or WaterEquity. It really is a phenomenal opportunity. We are supporters. It's like they have a portion of our carry, so it's slightly Schrodinger's donation. Hopefully everything's going to go embarrassingly well, and it'll be an enormous donation. But we're all working very hard to make that happen. Thank you so much to Marissa Sterling on our team for making this happen. Obviously, Gary, thank you so much for taking the time with us. I really look forward to the next time we see each other. And finally, to you all, thank you so much for being here. It's been a huge pleasure to have you as part of this conversation between GaryWhiteWater.org and WaterEquity and Burnt Island Ventures. Thank you so much for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.